hectic. I'm doing great. People want to say things I don't know why. I can't control that, but I can speak up for myself. Hey man, have a great weekend. Think on the road. I was on the radio, but I mean, it's not also out of the norm for anybody close to Theo having something about his mental health. He has a history of it. So why Rogan's getting backlash from it, like, I'm a little concerned. If you're reading what some people are saying about Theo, you'd be like, oh fuck. Joe can call Theo. That's probably the best move, and not say the biggest podcast in the world.
I remember when Rogan said to you about the whole, that whole thing that happened with the fighting ending, which I even remember thinking, like, what the, that's so fucking.
It changed the podcast.
I know,
Joe,
I wouldn't be here.
Because fucking Shop goes, the best thing that Brendan ever did was we could have taken it out. There was an option, and Brendan said, hey, you know what? This is what we do. If we're going to podcast, let them see everything.
Yeah.
And then the New Yorker came out and said an astonishing podcast, and it was actually one of the things that really catapulted
It's true.
into a real, like, people were like, this dude's got balls, man. Because, yeah.
Yeah, but I remember at the time I didn't.
And it was a really important moment in a way. Because Joe saw that Brennan had 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Yeah, he was right.
He was right.
Of course.
He saw that Brennan was
all downhill from there. That's the peak of it.
I will say that when it comes to wrestling, a lot of people would be surprised.
Yep. But yeah. Anyways,
you gave a lot of real good wrestlers.
Oh yeah. With back to Rogan, like, I think he's just, he talks fucking 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. With Theo, it's not too crazy. Out of all Joe's friends, be worried about Theo.
By the way, the Joe Rogan,
it's not that crazy.
Yeah.
Like, because if you do, I reached out to Theo when I saw that clip of him, like, just trying not to take my own life, and then everyone's telling me online how he bombed. It was a horrible film. I'm like, oh, I know Theo. So I was like, oh shit. Hey, I texted him. I said, hey man, let me know if you need to talk. Are you good? He responded back 3 seconds later, went, brother, I'm good. It's all bullshit. I went, then we're good. But if you didn't talk to Theo direct, you just saw that, I would be concerned, and maybe that's what Joe's dealing with.
Joe's done more talking than anybody on the planet with his podcast publicly. You could probably count on one hand the times he's even said, he's so careful. He's so good at never putting his foot in his mouth. He's so good at it, man. That's such discipline. And I don't think he'll put his foot in his mouth. I don't consider it either.
Oh no, your friend's worried about you.
I don't think
man, it's not real. Okay.
There's nothing about this that's controversial.
No.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Dude, do you have a problem with it, Jim? You just think you should have done it not on air?
I would say, once you brought up the fact that Theo did talk about this publicly, it kind of changes my thought. But, I mean, let's say I opened up to you guys, but I wasn't public. I wouldn't want you guys honestly say stuff. But, since you went public with it, I don't feel as bad. But, yeah. Alrighty, so people were talking about how it's the best.
Someone tagged me this because I'm telling my kids this is Brendan Shaw.
By the way, not a bad call. Similar facial structure.
Yeah, I don't suck cock though.
Well,
those are rumors.
But he is slam dunking his nuts in another man's butt,
100%,
and it's fine.
Whoever his doctor is, let's get me an appointment.
He's in his 70s, right?
He's 72.
Yeah.
And that's impressive.
So John Travolta, for the audio listeners, people are looking at how he looks right now, and he looks incredible for 72.
He's so talented, too.
He's the best. He's also, I've heard from so many people who, he did my TV show, but he is, everybody will tell you he's a great person. He's a great guy.
Just very,
he's a wonderful.
He likes massages.
Yeah,
man, look at his face, dude. Come on. You gotta give it up.
I mean, it's gotta be.
Who is the 28-year-old?
Why is he wearing that hat, though?
Technology, look at his daughter.
It's incredible. So John Travolta said he looks unrecognizable. No, he doesn't. That looks just like John Travolta when he was 28.
That's right, buddy. He's just got a type.
Unrecognizable? No. I know exactly who that is.
That is one hell of a facelift. That is genius. I mean, look at his neck even.
Yeah, it's usually you can tell in the neck.
Yeah.
You just got that turkey gobbler.
I mean, he's got some smooth skin everywhere. He had a neck tuck.
Technology.
Awesome.
It's kind of wild, yeah.
He looks
I
fantastic.
can't wait to look super young.
And yet still, he's bald. You can't do anything much
That's
hair.
what you do.
I know, but he has so much hair. Is he bald?
Yeah,
He's completely bald.
But did he do that just, is that
No,
thing?
No.
he's losing his hair.
He had fake hair.
You're still in the fight. You're losing 10-8.
Still in the fight, Bob.
You're losing rounds 10-8.
I mean,
It was
my friend said
10-7.
shave it.
Yeah, I think you should go bald.
I might look.
That's why I want you to do it. Yeah, it'd be so funny.
I might look so bad.
It'd make your nose look bigger.
What, if you shaved it?
Yeah.
My hair does bring out my nose.
I mean, your hair grows back out, right? As long as it still grows out.
I mean,
Just shave it. Just see what it looks like.
Sure.
sure.
What else you got, Chan?
This is kind of cool. I think this is. Hold on. Let's do this one. I think this is BTS in Mexico, and this is with the Mexican president. And we'll go back to that in a second.
Wow.
But look at how the fans came out for BTS. You can't even, the microphones get broken up.
Dude, what? Oh my God. What? Is that real or AI?
It's real. They're so enormous. It's like they're massive.
Who is that? Who is that boy band?
You don't know BTS?
BTS.
Yeah,
You've definitely heard of them.
They're huge.
Yeah, it's
And they're so good, right? They
Yeah,
can
they're
sing,
of course.
dance. That's that Korean work ethic. They started like 13, 10.
I mean, it's a factor. It's kind of messed up, but yeah.
Yeah,
It's a factor.
It's a factor.
It's like turning out race horses, but they're so good.
Yeah, the other ones aren't that
That's
great.
crazy, that popularity.
Yeah.
I don't even get that when I come to town to stand up.
That is crazy.
Wait, I just want to show you this real quick. So this is let me put this in the browser. This is Jason Derulo.
Yes.
So to me, I didn't think Jason Derulo is that big of a deal, you know? Yes or no? Do you guys think he's like insanely popular?
But he also does a lot of
Who is that? I don't
producing,
know.
like music, right?
He's a singer,
Okay.
He was a huge. You know a lot of his songs.
but like there's people that have way more popularity, and his house though is so freaking insane. I
You know,
can't
he
take
never
the whole
touched a
thing,
man's
but
wealth by his house.
But he's also wrote a ton of hit songs.
Oh yeah, there's money.
That's where his money's from.
production is a producer.
When you're a writer, it's everything.
His house is wild.
Yeah,
The money's actually in the writing.
It's worth watching this clip if you want to get inspired by houses.
I don't get inspired by people's wealth.
Really?
Never.
Even Drake's house?
I don't give a flying fuck.
Yeah,
What do you get inspired by?
creativity.
Good dads.
Good dads.
People not being dickheads.
That's a good.
Is that it, brother?
That's pretty much it.
All right, pal. We did it again, buddy.
One more time.
Where are you gonna be at? Are you on the road this weekend?
Buddy, I will be this weekend at the Grand Comedy Club in Escondido, Friday, Saturday. The Grand Comedy Club. I actually love this gig. I love Adam Wasser owns it, and it's just so much fun. And then June 5 and 6, I am at the Schaumburg Improv. Come get some.
Nice. And if you want this episode all ad-free and extended, all shows are ad-free, 2 extended ad-free episodes, all right? And fan question at least once a month, you get behind-the-scenes content. It's our Patreon. Go to patreon.com/TFATK. Just $5 a month. Get you something. All right, kids. This fine kid, we're out.
Worst podcast ever.
Anyway, so we have a contradiction in Rabbi Rothschild himself says, on the one hand, that we should bring a minchah, the Chavay thinks himself that it's a different type of minchah, toss it out, throw it in the garbage. The other hand, he says, the different place says that's perfect. You don't go, you don't even have to bring another thing. It wasn't shot. So we had three shot. One is like, so just, we said shot as we go along. Because it's basically, yes, it is Siyah, and we're going to go through it. Cool it rapidly out. The reason why I did the chart, because now you can see the cooler. You see that cooler is well better about it. Both of them actually don't say like, what is Rabbit? Rabbit says it's different from the price. He says that the Chayin in one price is thinking about another soul, not another mincha. He thought that this mincha was brought by Shitting, not by Ruben. So that's false out of the price. That's why it says he brought out. He says it's a very because he just messed up. He knew the owner's from it. He just thought it's a different kind of mincha. None of my questions. Except that, well, I actually don't like that. Actually saying that when a person messes up, and it's not he said he messes up, then it's kosher. He's holding his hand in precious, it's this thing. That's it. And he's holding it on mid class. Look at you at children else, look, try to say, home shimmy for the movie, whatever. Like, and then you go to the next 15 minutes, you don't finally get his name right. Yeah, every after you finally listen to you, he says yes. Yeah. So, did he make a mistake? No, he didn't make a mistake. His mistake was so gross that it's not even a mistake. That's ravish. Gross? No. When you make a mistake, the fact that it was so bad, that's the Adirab, at least it worked. That's what he's saying. A mistake that's so obvious, that's where it comes from. Next one, the rubber band. By the way, take also as you see that a lot of the students are very easy and competitive on the problem. But you take up today. Wow. So, when a person makes a mistake, you turn it off as a faulty and unmeasured. So they're not that's exposure. So whatever it was, you did this pan, this fried bread, they hold it and cut it. No longer was preserved for an animal. That's where it's going. And that's rubbish else. That's the most mistake. It's possible. And we also bring the cups of rubber line precise paragraphs in Blue Magic. It says that this person makes a mistake in the mitzvah. He calls one mitzvah like mistake. He gets streaks. You see your past one. First says the Zoy's first of everything. All the numbers are under one phrase. So we call it or not that's what passion is. And what passion is not that's inspired. It's within the realm of the mitzvah. But they say, wait a minute, we go with the concept of Zoy's first of everything. There's another concept. Zoy's first of happens. So the person gets stuck in a happiness, should have some other options. The person thinks, one makes mistakes. He has to bring a happiness because he said it was a happiness. Later, one get the cost that happens out. It's all in the same umbrella of happiness. Therefore, they don't agree with Rabbi's shot. The Rabbi's shot. That's the Rabbi. But the Rabbi actually don't agree with the middle one. Now, the Rabbi actually they don't like get it. But a contradiction of the fight. Two brothers say that that's something in the middle. It's okay. That's not okay. It says the Rabbi the difference is that's something in the middle. You can say the word difference. And I'm bringing you I'm bringing you my questions. You can say the middle class. When you say the middle class, that's where it comes from. But actually, tradition that we're not going to raise Rava. So yesterday, the Rabbi asked the question, what the person messes up? It's an obvious mess up. Instead, I'm bringing I'm from Paul. The person is walking with it's like a razor, which is a very dry name for no water, and he calls it a bubble. So when you're Shimon is kosher. But why? Okay, so that's the problem. So basically what we see is that each sheep, the Rabbi Rothschild, each one has a problem. Nothing is solid. Nothing is, you don't have one answer that you're really good at. So this is why. Those are the sheep that are all the four those are the sheep that are the Rabbi, the heights, the Rabbi, the heights. So as we saw, Rabbi is a big thing. When a person makes a real step, as Rashi puts a full about, said shtus, real shtus. I can say, you guys in here, everybody look at me, why because I'm here, let me say this real fast. I gotta say, my favorite, Marcus Rafi, shows where she goes and shit. And the guy asks me a question. She looks at him and says, that question, it's so bad, it's not even shtus. So if you're not even shtus, 5 minutes later, a guy asks me, that's shtus. So this is so bad, it's not even shtus. It's bad. He's holding it in his hand. It's this, then it's a cracker, and he's holding it in soft paper. Okay, so it's a bad mess up. Remember that? He understood what he did here. Why toss it? Why? So Rabbi says when it's so obvious, then it's kosher. Rabbi says the exact opposite. Rabbi says it's so obvious, such a bad mistake, that itself makes it possible. Okay, so yeah, she would Rabbi and Rabbi. Nevertheless, whether Shire, that's partial player Shire. Rabbi will have a Shire. When a person messes up and says, this is crazy. Oh, I'm in for his head. Made out of flowers. And he said, oh, this is an oil. An oil in the apartment. What kind of garden was it? The man who's over in the game out. Got to know this stuff. Yes, oil always is off. A hot dog, always in. So, it's not a dog, not a kid, it's a piece of bread. So, what's my lesson? I haven't even seen much of it really possible. It's the shots that if it's such a bad mistake, it's not possible. What much I can do? If this is a bad mistake, it should be coached. We told bread equals in nothing. But look, I agree with you. It should be simple as far as I mentioned. Bread is the process that the other thing is there's a good part that all the process is that's a next one. Make it simple. Then it's fine, you can give you a pass, but you make a mistake, you get something like that. You know? So much of shit is one of my friends. You got one to see that it's really hard. You got to share it. I want to report this to your buddies and that's the problem. Like yourself. And you just really, I want that passion. You know, that acceptance. That's what the same time right now. But it's important because it's actually but have you ever seen some kind of contribution? I'd say most of the answers, most of what issues are good. Others, but others you haven't seen discoveries. Very, very soon. You know, it's not going to work. Maybe it's integrated. Yeah. Places that we do. But the last part of it is saying, oh, you're out of the stop. The what we're saying is stop. And then I love this thing that I think no one says, I'm going to say, it's down to real close. Let's just feel like but you can't say it's a passion. You can feel the lesson. should just also it's not what where you go. So I'm looking back. But it makes sense that I understand this. So I don't think just like like this one, that's kind of maybe still with all this movie stuff. So it's not small. I mean, it's here. It's not like the world. It's still having shots like the whole speaking there. A lot of people look at that and say, shit, I don't know, shit, my dollar. How do you say, okay, but one thing that I noticed was shots, was but one of the people that this is I don't know, I don't know. What is it? Always supposed to be shot. What's it? No. Yeah. That's the thank God for so see all these applications. Anyway, so we're actually trying to oh, so then I don't want to speak. Anyway, one my way, we got into some actions. In other words, he said, we should have we have to practice like we have three explanations how to explain the tradition, and each one has a whole, each one has a problem. Just went through this route. So the middle of the rabbi, anyone was putting on gravel and shadow, we should push it out. Abaya's impression on Rabbi is that once you do a hackish and you learn that if you that's a that's something between the bars, to God that's not moving between the shimon or the mental itself. But that's up to God. Says Abaya's impression. The Rabbi of shadow issue is makes a topic for you have the hackish also says there's paras and also that should be in one umbrella. You should get a free pass and that's like a topic, but you don't. But I just found should do it very well before it says that in the Bible, when you change partial why. So the revolution breaks. Trying to remember what this is on. And you'll choose Rabbi Rothschild called the artist Satan. Or the Satan. That is unfocused. Which is sad. That's all. But the mean, the first was he swore false. He was trying to force the being partners and dreams. Sports, games, flowers. It messes up once he goes to this English one. It's coming. Reading a flower. Now, the way to remember it is because it's so that dreams, like this is very like the benches. It doesn't bring any oil or any divine life. Just dreams, flowers. It's one of the best things. Is that the club of a cycle. So I asked her to speak so much of a bunch of times we were doing so that's that now we play way more depth, but you gotta see. There's many steps in a cycle. So basically you see it's best. It's going to be on the fast speed. The husband is warned his wife not be able to put on the bench. Listen, stop it. Brings it to his speed up. It's a whole long process. So that they remember nice code, the other code, and the other here. Kids are brings them in front. And they're writing that everybody knows. So he gets in the water. The water, he raises the champagne. She drinks the water. Then she's good. She explodes. She's a butt. There you go. So the only thing we're having is for that book that she's based off the Gemara, based as well, she has crazy people, she has like all of it. It's not much shit. Like what? You already go to the third place over there, and shut now the window. And that's what the guy's gonna do. It's a little bit wrong. This way, to almost the fingers, to get to the medicine shards. Yeah, like you do the little, you go up, down, right, left. Where we go from this, and then you can call a gusha. A gusha is everybody goes to the who I know is 1/4 of people are gusha. How do you know? So we had a bath in hotel, so she flew up, she exploded, okay, and then so, you know that? That's the guy who took part. So you learn from that. That's right. By the day goes by, you learn something really important. That's like different shit. That's what it's not awesome. It's not awesome to be much stuff. Oh, so you're going to do a race. Doing it in the car, right? But instead of wasn't his fault, do a race. You know, especially if you have self-drive, so you put the screen from you, so that's something that you put right. Let me know. You go. From that with charts, they're okay. There's technology the chart. So, so here's the thing. He's doing awesome. As the plan messes up, that takes up some other play. He looks at the rules and says, oh, this game from the guys was hard enough. What's this thing? You can't get it and throw it in the dark. Literally. It might be a place over there to burn it, whatever, but it's dark. You don't completely win. So, which one we can spend our own? It's basically mimics the public context. So, public context is a perfect place of the whole place that's just, it's another better perfect. Roll it out. Every other part you can do it in the process. It's better. There's the next day. It doesn't work to the order. It has to be another one. So, throw it out. Kill it every door. Context is another place. So, kill one. What's the name of it? Kill it, throw out. Significant public fighting. And the income comes in this cycle. Why? Actually, that's like the Skyrim. Because it mimics a public context. And the very itself calls this new thing a public context. Why? Well, let's see another check. You should put anyone there. See, this is the. It's wrong. It's so bad. It's so bad. You're a bad guy. You're that idea. What's that idea? So, you don't get the honor shit. You get the oil. You don't let the money go for the next section. You have to see. Start posting a copy. Well, I basically go to that. Tell me that's first. Oh, why? Using this on the site does all that. It's like not going to do it. It says, sometimes drugs, once you're a drug, you have extra money left over for this good process. On the site, you give it as a drug, as long as you want per month. On the leg, every dollar. You have like zero shot. What? Zero shot means you have the same word. So you learn one part from the other, one idea to the other, because there is others. This is the word others, people have to sit, but somebody's on the thing, it's a bloody prayer, I'm bloody. Not how this voice from the I believe that's the others. What you're doing, by the way, if you're watching, share,
What up, so this fucking thing sucks so much, God. So much fucking God. Why? Technology is so shit. It's so bad. People in the future are like, dude, how did people put up with this shit? And like, it was the worst. It's like assholes designing this shit. No one really knows for sure Ella by Ella Divrei Elohim Chaim, but this is the Mizar we live by. Berkatah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher kedoshanu b'mitzvot v'tzivanu al sefirat ha'omer. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments, commanded us concerning the counting of the Omer. Today is 48 days, which is 6 weeks and 6 days of the Omer. May the Merciful One restore unto us the service of the Beit HaMikdash speedily to its place speedily in our days of Mensah. May the Merciful One restore unto us the service of the Beit HaMikdash speedily in our days. May the Merciful One restore unto us the service of the Beit HaMikdash to its place speedily in our days. Amen. Salah. Are you fucking serious? Alright, folks. Coffee and Kabbalah Flower and Coffee. 3rd of Sivan, 5786, Tuesday, May 19th. Everything sucks. 3761, creation of the world, birth of Adam and Eve, Chava. 3631, when 30 Seth, son of Adam, was born. 3526, 235, Enosh, son of Seth, was born. 3436, 325, Kenan, son of Enosh, was born. 3366, 395, Mahalal, son of Kenan, was born. 3301, 460, Yared, son of Mahalal, was born. 3139, 622, Chanuk, son of Yared, was born. Shit sucks. How many days have you done?
I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane
144. Everything sucks.
and religion. One of the most difficult aspects in starting to study Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah is getting a handle on just how those ideas developed over time. It's tempting to think that, for instance, Kabbalah has just always existed in the form that we have it, or that Kabbalah is just one thing at all. Of course, neither of these positions is really tenable. Such notions developed greatly through the ages and are still developing. And there are now, and there have always been, numerous mutually exclusive schools of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. This class is meant to serve as an introduction to Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah from the point of view of its incredibly complex development from the prophets of ancient Israel unto the rise of modern Hasidism in the 18th century. Of course, this series isn't meant to be exhaustive by any means, but only should serve as a springboard for deeper study and reflection. And hopefully it will also enable you to situate developments in Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah in their historical and cultural context, and hopefully embolden you to dive into the primary texts, which are admittedly as sublime as they are obscure. Let me express my gratitude to Congregation Tehillah for allowing me to use these lectures to reach a larger audience here on Esoterica. If you want, you can find the entire series under the playlist Entering the Garden, an Introduction to Jewish Mysticism and Kabbalah. I'll be uploading them over the next few weeks, or if you find these episodes after autumn of 2021 and you want to watch the entire series, you can find them in that playlist. If you find this series on Kabbalah interesting, I'd hope you check out my other content on topics in esotericism,
and perhaps consider supporting the production of free academic and scholarly topics in occultism, hermetic philosophy by joining my Patreon or perhaps with a one-time donation. You can find those links below, and I really appreciate your consideration. Now, let's enter the garden of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. Folks, welcome back. Welcome back. We're going to get to, in some ways, the high watermark of the Kabbalah tonight. I say the high watermark because Gloria's formulation of Kabbalah has basically become Jewish theology. And that's something I think that, you can't really shake a stick at that. It's a really incredible thing that fundamentally one guy, in many ways, formulated how Jews all over the world understand their God, understand their scriptures, understand the world that they live in. And it's a glorious version of the Kabbalah. It's so deeply embedded in Judaism that phrases like tikkun olam, a phrase that I bet everybody in this class has heard a dozen times. Shuls have tikkun olam committees. This idea comes directly from Yitzhak Luria. So many ideas that are commonplaces in Judaism really emerge from Yitzhak Luria. And so tonight we'll get to his ideas. Now I'm not going to exhaustively deal with his ideas for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that most of his books aren't even translated into English. The vast majority are not translated into English, and even the books that remain in Hebrew are so technical and so difficult that I have to admit, often can read pages of these books and still not know quite what the world's going on. These books are very, very difficult, and part of how Yitzhak Luria's Kabbalah developed was people trying to make sense of what in the world he was talking about. And so part of what happens is that the books are very complicated, and that the complicatedness has its own life. So we'll talk about that in a little bit as we get to Yitzhak Luria. But to rewind a little bit, to talk about this period that I sometimes refer to as the interregnum, that's the period after the composition of the Zohar, but before the rise of Luria and Kabbalah. What we have is that in that period, Kabbalah didn't really spread very quickly. It was a very underground, it was a very elite, it was a very hush-hush kind of thing. That's not to say that people weren't publishing things, talking about Kabbalistic ideas, but there was no desire to make it public. It was a very hush-hush, elite, esoteric practice, very much so. And by 1492, with the Alhambra Decree, which declared that basically all Muslims and Jews had to leave Spain or convert, you have the Kabbalah transforming from being a very elite, very very inward-looking, very secretive kind of thing, to the Kabbalah actually becoming imbued with a very eschatological, which is to say it has to do with the end of the world in a very messianic means. And so in the aftermath of the disaster that was 1492, Kabbalah is going to branch out into the world and it's going to become popularized. And many of the refugees who fled from Spain, who were actually saved by a Muslim leader, which I don't know why that doesn't get more press, but it should. Bayezid II was the Muslim leader of the Ottoman Empire that basically sent his entire fleet to Spain and saved as many Jews as he could. Not because he was a great guy or anything, he may have done that too, but he realized that you get all your doctors, lawyers, and scientists out of a country. Of course, he wanted them, and he was right to do it. The Ottoman Empire saw a huge boom from the importation of the refugees after the 1492 Alhambra Decree. By the way, you can also notice that Spain didn't do terribly good in many ways in the aftermath of that either. So many of these Jews are going to settle in the Ottoman Empire. One of the main places they're going to settle is going to be in Salonika. Salonika and Warsaw have been traditionally known as the only two Jewish cities in the world. And so Salonika and Greece is going to be one of the places they're going to settle. But many of the Kabbalistically inclined people are actually going to move to the place they're most familiar with, at least in their sort of imaginary landscape. And that's up in the Galilee at a place called Sfat, near Meron, where Shimon Bar Yochai is the traditional author of the Zohar, was thought to be buried. And it's there at Meron and Sfat, on Safed, where new forms of Kabbalah begin to emerge. Kabbalah begins to be popularized. This is a very important moment in the history of Kabbalah. You can teach it publicly at some level. There are classes you can take on Kabbalah. And what ends up happening is in this area, there is a rise of a new form of Kabbalah that is highly systematized, highly intellectualized, very encyclopedic, and very synthetic, which is just to say that it's organizing all kinds of Kabbalistic ideas into something like a Kabbalistic system. That system, of course, the major one is going to be Joseph Cordovero. We'll talk about him in just a moment. Of course, other forms of Kabbalah also existed at this time. We talked at length last time about Abraham Abulafia and his so-called ecstatic or prophetic Kabbalah. This is a completely other form of Kabbalah that doesn't really care much about the Sirot and that kind of stuff. He knows about them and he's aware of them and he's interested in them, but that's not part of the parcel of his project. His project is a kind of intellectual communion with the divine, and that's accomplished by a wide range of things like breathing techniques and focusing in on Hebrew combinations of Hebrew words and various kinds of mantra-like structures. So there are other forms of Kabbalah that came about in the milieu of the Zohar that didn't quite make it. Now, what's going to be really important is that in the Safed milieu, in the Safedian form of Kabbalah, Isaac Luria and his student Chaim Vital are going to reincorporate some of Abulafia's ideas. That's going to basically save Abulafia from oblivion. Remember, he got basically excommunicated and exiled to a tiny island in Corsica, and he kind of vanishes from history and dies. He's going to be kind of resurrected in many ways by Luria and Kabbalah. And as I mentioned, this is the area in Safed where Kabbalah is being systematized and it's being popularized. I cannot stress that enough. Kabbalah is being taught in public. Why? Because they think the world's about to end. They think that the 1492 Al-Harbor Decree was the beginning of the end, and that Kabbalah, the unveiling of Kabbalah to the world, would ultimately lead to a kind of eschatological, an end-of-the-world event, and that end-of-the-world event would be led at some level by Kabbalistic speculation, and it would urge in the Messiah. And in fact, there were many people at that time, Cordovero being one, Chaim Vital being another, Luria being another, that many people, including those people themselves, thought they were the Messiah. Chaim Vital, which you have some of his notes, his autobiographical sketches, journals, diaries, he even says in his notes that if I just studied the Mishnah a little longer, I would have become the Messiah. I know it. So these guys are really convinced that the Messiah is not just around the corner, but they might be it. And that kind of idea that you might be the Messiah and you might be ushering in the Messianic age is going to be hugely important as we get to next time when we get to Shabbatai Tzvi and his mystical heresy that leads to people to believing that he's the Messiah. So Shabbatai Tzvi is next week, and that's not. So as I said, this is a time period where Kabbalah is being popularized. This is a time period where Kabbalah is being opened up to the masses at some level. I say the masses is being opened up to really elite dudes, to everybody. And there are new services invented. Kabbalah Shabbat, almost certainly the most popular Jewish service that exists today. Into a Jewish service, you can probably get into a Friday night Kabbalah Shabbat service. That service is developed at this time. And Shlomo Alphabet's writes the centerpiece of that text, that prayer service, Lachadodi, Come My Beloved, Come My Bride, and that text, Lachadodi, is a classic now. It's all Jews. And so that was being written by Shlomo Alphabet. Also, it's worth pointing out that not only these guys studying together, they're marrying each other's sisters and stuff. Joseph Cordovero married Shlomo Alphabet's daughter. So Cordovero, or Alphabet, was Cordovero's father-in-law. So you have all kinds of this. It's not just sort of an intellectual thing. They're kind of in bed with each other. And so this is a very tight-knit world. I can only imagine some Kabbalistic drama that must have precipitated in that circle. I would have loved to see Kabbalistic drama. But unfortunately, a lot of that doesn't survive. You just want a rough idea about what some of these texts look like. So this is Pardes Romim. This is the main text of Joseph Cordovero. This is the central text of the Cordoverian system of Kabbalah. A rough idea about how dense it is. It's about that long. Right? So it's a substantial text. This doesn't have any commentary, by the way. It's a straight text. If you want to get a sense of what this looks like inside, it's pretty dense, wall to wall. Text, right? You get a sense of what this looks like. So these texts are no joke. Pardes Romim is an incredibly difficult, incredibly challenging text to try to read. There is no translation of this into English at all. I don't think there's no systematic translation for sure. And these texts, many of these foundational texts of Kabbalah still do not have English translations, which is kind of mind-blowing considering how popular at least some version of Kabbalah is, and many of the foundational texts aren't available in English. Even finding copies in Hebrew is challenging. So this one is an example of the early systematization of the Sacred Zohar found in Cordovero. And again, trying to find
these texts are super difficult, and finding English translations that just don't exist. They just straightforwardly don't exist. So studying Kabbalah in the original languages is basically what you have to do if you're going to get really deep into Kabbalah's main texts remain fundamentally in Hebrew, language as well. So, beginning in the 15th century, not only are Jews interested in Kabbalah, but Christians are too. This is a strange turn of events, but it's really important in the development of Western Christian spirituality, especially esoteric spirituality. As you, I'm sure, know, by the 15th century, there was a movement in Italy that called the Renaissance or whatever. But what we have is the arrival of a great deal of new texts that are being imported from Greece. That's new, they're actually really old texts. But they're being imported into Italy, and what's happening is that many of these old texts, they are underwriting an idea that's going on, that in order to get sort of a pure intellectual reality or pure intellectual appreciation of what's going on in the world, we need to go back in time and look at the original text, look at the original foundations of this literature. This is sometimes called the Ad Fontes Revival, which is the source of the revival. And what you get is a massive translation project led by people like Marsilio Ficino, who are translating for the first time the entire works, for instance, of Plato. Most Christians in the Middle Ages had basically never read Plato. They had fragments of them. They had the Timaeus and they have other documents, but most pieces of Plato had never been read by a Christian. It just didn't exist. And so you have an enormous influx of new, old ideas coming in from Greece in the 15th century. There was an idea that was current at the time that primordial wisdom was somehow more reliable than what was going on in the Middle Ages. In fact, it's the Renaissance humanists are going to refer to that time period before them as Gothic. The Goths, of course, were the people that destroyed the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire, and the humanists really hated these people. They thought they were backwards and superstitious. Their writing was incomprehensible, etc. And so there was a long idea of the Renaissance humanists that the Middle Ages basically was a mistake. All of the scholasticism, all of it was a mistake. And so what we need to do is go back to the original Latin and Greek writers and learn from the original sources, not through a bunch of commentaries. You cut all that out and go back and read just the original sources. And so this Ad Fontes approach also included a great deal of what's going on in Jewish writing as well, because Christians believed that fundamentally Christianity had emerged from Judaism and that there was primordial wisdom to be had by the Jews, and that primordial wisdom captured things that perhaps Christianity had not quite covered. And so Kabbalah fit that bill. That's exactly what Kabbalah claims to be. It claims to be primordial wisdom given to Moses at some level, and then transmitted to Shimon Bar Yochai eventually transferred into the sacred Zohar. And so the idea is that the Kabbalah was one form of this primordial wisdom, along with Zoroastrianism and Plato and Hermes Trismegistus and these sort of figures. And so there was an idea that Kabbalah had secrets that had been preserved by the Jews, but the Jews had preserved them, but they didn't understand them. Because of course the Jews are backwards, blind people who reject the Messiah and don't understand anything. And so the idea was that the Jews had all this Kabbalah, but the Jews really didn't understand it. And so these Christians really begin to turn their attention to the Kabbalah, and they begin to recruit non-Jews, that is to say, Jews, former Jews who have converted to Christianity, are Jews who are kind of amenable to this sort of humanistic project. And so we have converted Jews, converso folks like Eusebius and Eusebius, and we also have just Jews who are just kind of cool with learning together, folks like Yochanan and Alman. And what ends up happening is that many of the texts of Kabbalah slowly begin to be translated from Hebrew and Aramaic into Latin. And as those texts begin to get translated into Latin, Christians began to see that, one, there's something really, really interesting and really captivating about the Kabbalah, and two, they begin to believe that the Kabbalah actually proves the truth of Christianity. And so they use it not just as a way of accessing primordial wisdom, but also part of what is sometimes referred to as the Latin polemical tradition, where Jewish texts are marshaled against Jews in the interest of converting. And so the Kabbalah is actually vying for all kinds of Trinitarian ideas. The first three Sefirot are actually the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and all kinds of other ideas where the basic structure is that underneath the hood of Kabbalah is actually a kind of mystical Christianity. The Jews just can't see it. And so what ends up happening is a lot of these texts began to be translated from Hebrew and Aramaic into Latin. And this begins to form a time period where some of these early Christian Kabbalists are combining ideas from Plato, ideas from the Hermetic world, ideas from Parmenides and Gestas. They're beginning to combine ideas from Kabbalah, and they're beginning to form synthetic new versions of Christianity, as you can imagine, are pretty controversial. So Kabbalah becomes one of the admixtures by which a new kind of Christianity is beginning to emerge, a kind of esoteric Christianity begins to emerge in the 15th century. And some of the adopters of these are some pretty famous folks, at least in the history of mysticism or the history of the cult. These are going to be folks like Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, who's famous 900 Theses, challenged the Pope to basically debate him about these. And basically, Ficino thought that Pico had thought that he had fundamentally synthesized all knowledge. Kabbalah, Christianity, Pythagoreanism, everything. He thought he had systematized every form of knowledge into a coherent system of 900 theses, and that he basically said, I want to debate people about this. I'll show you that I'm right. And his Kabbalistic theses are among some of the earliest examples of Christian Kabbalah, and they are at the pinnacle of the book. They come at the very, very end. There's some final theses, and 900 theses, and he really thinks that Kabbalah has really landed on some of these things in a way that no one else has. Francesco Giorgi is also a really early systematic incorporator of Hermetic and Kabbalistic ideas of Christianity. His works are really, really difficult to access. I don't think they've been translated to English, and they are some of the earliest examples of systematic analysis of Christianity using Kabbalah as a lens. Athanasius Kircher, of course, the famous German polymath, also integrated Kabbalah in his thinking, and his version of the Tree of Life, the Eighth Sign, has gone on to basically become the standard one in the Christian occult world, or the occult world more generally. Folks who exist in places like the Golden Dawn, in Hermetic orders, often the form of the Kabbalah they're inheriting is actually traceable back to folks like Athanasius Kircher or to Johannes Reuchlin. Reuchlin also a very important scholar of Hebrew, perhaps one of the greatest scholars of Hebrew in the Renaissance. And his two works, they were Fictio and De Kabbalistica, are systematic presentations of both Kabbalistic ideas and also Kabbalistic texts translated in their entirety into Hebrew. Many non-Jews whose first encounter with Kabbalah was almost certainly going to be a translation of De Kabbalistica, and that or another version of the text is Kabbalah Desnudata, but Kabbalah Unveiled, by Christian Northern Rosenau. You see a bunch of these guys are Germans. The Germans were pretty interested in this, and in fact many people have made the argument that the Protestant Reformation has its origins in this kind of touch with Kabbalah. That Kabbalah is sort of the escape velocity that the Protestant Reformation at some level needs to get away from Catholicism, and that the bridge at some level away from Catholicism, the gravitational pull away from Catholicism at some level at a very early strata was Kabbalah. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that Martin Luther was terribly interested in Kabbalah. He wasn't. So different ball of wax. At any rate, Kabbalah Desnudata is incredibly influential. Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy is probably the standard text in the Renaissance on occult philosophy and magic. Virtually all magic practitioners who operate now in the West, let's say folks for whom magic is a part of their spiritual practice, almost certainly trace all of their thinking back at some level to Cornelius and Agrippa. So Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy are foundational, and Agrippa integrates Kabbalah into his thinking seamlessly. He really is deeply connected to ideas in Kabbalah. So what I want to point out is that Christians are also actually Kabbalah. I think I mentioned this maybe a couple times ago, that the first time that the Zohar was printed, it was printed in a single volume at Cremona at the behest of Christians. Christians wanted it. It wasn't Jews trying to get it printed. The Jewish version was printed in Mantua just about a year later in 3 volumes, which is still standard now to print the Zohar in 3 volumes. But the Cremona 1-volume edition was basically printed at the behest of Christians, and it's extremely rare. I think I saw one at auction a couple of years ago for a couple $100,000 or something. It's a very rare volume. But at any rate, just to say that Kabbalah isn't just affecting Jews. It's also deeply affecting Christians. Christians are also really interested in the development of Kabbalah, and what's going to end up happening is that will form a trajectory by which Christians will begin to interiorize a lot of Kabbalistic ideas, and that will, at some level, lay the foundation for what we sometimes call Western Judaism and the practice of the occult. So yeah, Kabbalah is wrapped up in that entire project. And I bet if you've ever seen an example of like a magical circle or something, you'll see Hebrew words written all around the first word or whatever. A lot of it has to do with the Kabbalah onto Christianity and onto Christianity's more esoteric cult Messiah. Christian Kabbalah has its own life. It eventually comes to become a new form of Kabbalah called Rabbinic Kabbalah, which is very influential in the cult circles, primarily in the Let's go back to Safed, right? Let's go back to Safed. Safed's really the stage that the stage role this is playing out. So Moshe ben Yaakov Cordero is going to die, as all people do, and so it comes in one process, one cycle of Kabbalistic development. And I will say that you can, in some sense, divide Kabbalistic history into two big phases. The first phase is from the early Kabbalah and Sefer Zohar all the way to Cordero. That's one section of Kabbalah. The rest of Kabbalah can be divided into everything after that. We are all living in the shadow of what comes next, and what comes next is Gloria. Gloria arrived actually at Safed from Jerusalem. He was born in Jerusalem, although he grew up primarily in Egypt. He arrived at Safed, according to legend at least, of the very day that Cordero died, and allegedly he saw as the funeral train was making its way to the graveyard, which you can still go see Cordero's tomb in Safed. I've seen it right there. You can make your way to Cordero's tomb, and the funeral train allegedly, Gloria said, he saw a pillar of fire rising in front of the funeral train. Now, for folks who know some Bible, you'll recognize that image immediately, right? That's how God appeared to the Israelites during the Exodus. That God appeared to the Israelites as a pillar of fire. And so, literally, Gloria says that God appeared before the funeral train before Pharaoh as a pillar of fire, and Gloria settled in Safed. Gloria's life prior to this whole couple of years before he dies in Safed is actually relatively unremarkable. He is born in Jerusalem. His father dies when he was relatively young. He was raised by his paternal uncle in Egypt. His uncle is actually relatively wealthy, pretty wealthy guy, and he provides Gloria with a very high quality Jewish education. And in his 20s, Gloria obtains what seems to be an early printed copy of the Zohar, maybe the Mantua, the 3-volume Mantua version, and he becomes completely infatuated with it. In fact, so infatuated that he basically goes derelict of duty. He was supposed to become a business person. He just abandoned that. He had married, and he just basically abandons his wife. And he just kind of lives most of his days meditating out in a hut near the Nile. And it's during those years, those 15 or some odd years, of him meditating on the Nile in this hut that he built for himself, that he begins, it seems, to formulate the idea that ultimately will become the Rabbinic Kabbalah as we know it. At some point, he has a kind of mystical breakthrough. I mean, even his birth was allegedly heralded by Elijah the prophet, who himself was legends that have now grown up around Gloria, that his birth before he was born, that Elijah the prophet was to his father. At any rate, Gloria would eventually make his way back to Jerusalem, and then he would eventually make his way to Safed, arriving, as I said, on the day of Cordero's death. And he would spend a couple of years there, just a couple of years, probably 2 or 3 years, and he died before he turned 40. This is one of these guys that, the flame that burns twice as bright only burns half as long. This guy just burned out. He was just such a titanic individual. And his ideas were just shockingly original. Well, with Cordero dead, many people, I think, didn't believe that Cordero was the Messiah, and when he died, it was a real big disappointment that he was but when Cordero died, there was the idea that, no, there's something else coming. Cordero was a herald, maybe kind of like Elijah for the coming Messiah. And it's like Gloria fit into that perfectly. Gloria began to teach Kabbalah basically every day. He had introductory level Kabbalah classes, come to Luria's Kabbalah Academy and learn intro Kabbalah. He also began to develop an inner circle of people that he began to teach his own ideas to. And the inner circle was composed of several students. We know a good bit about those students. And what's weird is that he seems to have taught different versions of things to different students. And we know that because they say so, that some people are allowed some things, and some people are allowed others, and some people get some part of the system, and some people get others. And we can see this in the publications because, for instance, one of Luria's students, Israel Saru, who doesn't really get credit for anything, no one really pays attention to him because of the fact that he's tall. But Israel Saru was one of the earliest publishers of Chaim Vital's works, it's like Luria's works rather, and he published them and popularized them. And so a big part of what's going on with Isaac Luria is that Luria really wants Kabbalistic ideas popularized. That's probably part of his sort of general messianic program. He believes in a very intense way that the Messiah is a hair's breadth away, and that if Kabbalah gets out there, it will usher in the Messianic age immediately. That kind of messianic fervor is kind of proved to be a disaster here in just a little bit. So after that, messianic fervor is almost always going to be a disaster. At any rate, he began to build a inner core of people, and then he died. He died. He died like 2 years into being in Zazen. And so his death wasn't, he was always kind of sickly, so his death wasn't completely shocking. But after his death, his two most important students would be Israel Saru, who I mentioned a moment ago, and the other, of course, the much more important student, at least historically, is going to be Chaim Vital. And it's going to be Chaim Vital's interpretation of the ideas of the Arizal, of Yitzhak Luria, that are going to accomplish the thing. The Arizal himself, it's like Luria basically wrote nothing. He wrote the Aramaic code. That's all for Shabbat. That's all we had. He didn't really write much. He taught, and his students sort of synthesized the things that he taught. It's a synthesized documents that we get. There's a long tradition of this kind of thing, right? The Buddha never wrote anything down. Jesus never wrote anything down. Muhammad couldn't read or write. There's a whole long tradition of people, Socrates famously never wrote anything. There's a whole long tradition of people who don't write things down and yet go on to change the world. So if you really want to change the world, don't write books. Writing books is a surefire way that you will not change the world. You have to be a charismatic leader and don't write anything. Just talk to people. And if you talk to people and you're charismatic enough, they will do all the writing for you. And, and again, it's like Glory was only there in something for 2 or 3 years. And he managed to make this kind of decisive impact through his student time. So, what do we know about the system of Lurian Kabbalah? Well, I'm going to go and tell you right now, I'm not going to be able to systematically go through every part because it is incredibly difficult and morose in its details. But the main thing to know about it is that whereas Cordovero was moving in a much more rationalistic, much more intellectualistic, much more systematic direction when it comes to trying to unpack the ideas of the Sacred Zohar, Florian is much more interested on the mythos of the Zohar. He's much more interested in the evolving process that the Zohar seems to describe about how God goes from being infinitely recessed to becoming present in the world. And so Luria's main shift is it's going to shift away from trying to systematically analyze every aspect of how reality was constructed, but rather focus on the unfolding, the dynamic unfolding of reality and the mythology of that unfolding. And it's the mythology, and I say mythology, I don't mean falseness or like the Loch Ness Monster is a myth, but it's the doing of it that really matters to him. Because for Luria, the entire drama of the unfolding or the evolution of reality as we know it isn't in the past, it's always present to us. And so, in a way that the Cordovero might describe that the events of the unfolding of the universe, be it the Sephirot or events in the past, the primordial past, the metaphysical past, for Luria, time is really weird because for him, it's all happening at once. It's happened back then, it's happening now, at some level it's kind of happening in the future, and the future's kind of reaching for us to redeem us. And so even notions like time become very weird in the Lurianic system. So what we get is that he's primarily interested in what I might call the mythological structure, the genesis of reality and its development, as that development is is comprehensible at any given moment in the development of humanity or God. For Luria, the development of God, the development of humanity are coming together in the same development. His system, as far as we have it, is a really highly developed system of analyzing reality. I can't say that it's always terribly coherent, and I certainly can't say that I always understand it. But what he's focused on, what his core idea is what often gets called the order of development or the order of evolution. This is often referred to as the seder ishtatlut, the order of evolution. In fact, the ishtatlut is actually a standard modern Hebrew word for evolution. So it's the evolution of reality. Now, just again, these evolutionary models like to be instructive, right? Because at some level, biological entities contain the past inside them. That is to say that you contain all kinds of things in your DNA from what we used to be. We're not apes like the apes before us. We contain DNA fragments of those apes. The past is still with us. Or as Bill Faulkner said, that the past isn't dead, it's not even past. And that's true also for Lurian and Kabbalah. The idea is, yes, there were things that happened in the primeval past, the primordial past, but those things are current to us now, which is still happening. And so what we get is that there is a sort of spiraling cycle of aggression. That is to say, the world is coming into being, the world is emerging as such, always emerging as such, and further, right, it's also regressing, it's also going back to the way that it was. So there is an incredible dynamism in the Lurianic system where you kind of don't know quite where you are in time, in space, you don't quite know where you are even in righteousness sometimes. There's a kind of constant movement to and fro, where the world is on the one hand becoming exiled, and on the other hand it's becoming redeemed. And so the Lurianic system, part of what makes it so difficult is that at the heart of the system is this dialectical structure where everything is happening all at once and everything is also being erased all at once. And so it's very difficult to figure out at what moment something is happening, because at every moment everything's always happening. And so knowing exactly what's going on in the system is very complicated because the system is so dynamic and it's almost like a fractal. The more you zoom in on a region of the fractal, the more the entire fractal reproduces. And so the system is very, very fractalized like that. And so it's often difficult to know exactly what's going on. But let's work some of the core ideas of the big first idea is this concept of Simsum. Simsum was an idea that was developed by Cordovero, actually. In fact, Cordovero was a teacher of Luria for a brief time, I think in the 1970s. And so Cordovero had to solve a problem. The problem is, well, how do you get from an infinite God whose light reaches every metaphysical, ontological aspect of reality? God's being is infinite, and so it must occupy every point within that infinity. How do you get to an idea that there's a gap? How do you get to the idea there's a place where God isn't in order for the world to be? Because it can't be the case that God is completely in fullness when the system is full, and you can't have a world. You can't have the Olamot. You can't have the world. So God has to create an emptiness, a divine emptiness, a vacuum. And what God does is God contracts some region of God's self. And I use words like region, but again, these spatial concepts are not accurate. But God ontologically contracts God's self. And that ontological contraction creates a void. And that void is both surrounded by God and yet is not God. It's a kind of gap. It's a kind of void or a vacuum. I always imagine like when you have to you gain a couple pounds and you need to get in some old pants, and so you like suck your belly in and tighten your belt real tight. It's like God sort of sucking in God's belly to get the belt on. I don't know how to. I always imagine that image for some reason. So God creates this void, this simsum, and into that simsum, into that void, into that contraction, that will be where the Olamot appear. The Olamot are the four worlds that comprise our reality. We do not have access to God's infiniteness. We just don't. We're finite. We do not have access to God's infiniteness. And so what we do have access to is what's left over from the process of filling that void. Now, how does that void get filled? Well, God, it's almost like a laser. God concentrates some of God's light. God finitizes some of God's light. And that finitized light, that finitized existence of God is permitted to enter into the void. And when it enters into the void, it cascades into the void, and that cascading, as it moves from the primal source of the divine into the void, it begins to weaken, so to speak. And as it begins to weaken, as it teeters down into the void, as it flows down into the void, it begins to weaken. And as it weakens, there are strategic parts, or the decisive parts in the weakening of the light into the void, just like if you were shining a laser, right? A laser is only going to be so powerful, only going to reach so far, the further it gets, the wider it gets, and the more it begins to break down and begins to fade away. God shoots that light into the void, and this is also found in the Zohar. And as that light goes in, it begins to break down. And as it breaks down into 4 distinct realms. And those 4 realms are the fundamental structures of reality. The first one is Adam Kadmon. Adam Kadmon is the primeval body of God. It's the way that we imagine God to be. It's when you think of God as a person, what you're imagining is Adam Kadmon. It's the first primeval glimpse of God as a being. Because before that, God is just infinite light, and God is utterly unimaginable. The first glimpse is Adam Kadmon, sort of like a negative image of God broadcast into the void. The next layer down is the realm of absolute illumination. Then down further is the world of Beriah, right, where God is becoming more and more concretized, not yet physical, but more and more concretized. And then we get to the world of formation, where God is recognizable. And then finally we get down to the world of Asiyah, and we are actually in a subsection of the world of Asiyah, and that sometimes is called the 5-world, 4-world, because our physical reality is distinct from all other 4 worlds, even the world of Asiyah. So the 4 worlds, the Olamot, are the ontological registers of reality. And what Luria imagines, and the reason why he imagines these 4 worlds, is that every single time there is a movement within the Godhead, an evolution in the Godhead, a change in the Godhead, that change has to be understood as a logical, dialectical progression of how God is mutated, how God is changing. Because every time God interacts with something, that image of God, that aspect of God alters. And so what we get in the world of the various registers of reality is we get entirely different branches of the Sphirot. Now, I might pull this up when we get to the Q&A later, is that one thing that makes the Lurianic system so mind-bogglingly complicated is that every register of reality has its own sephirotic structure. And inside of every Sphirot is more Sphirot. And so there are Sphirot inside of Sphirot inside of Sphirot. There are Sphirot on the backside of Gugura, which is the Achra, the world of evil. It is again, for folks who are familiar with some mathematics, it's like a fractal, that anytime you zoom in on any register of reality, you begin to see that the entire system of reality is reproduced over and over and over and over again. And you have these enormously complex, what are called Ilanot, or tree systems. And those really complex Ilanot, or tree systems, describe the various Sphirot as they're interacting with each other at these various registers of reality. We can't go into the various levels of reality throughout time, but each one of them is distinct, and each one of them is a moment in the development of the Godhead. Now, some folks who have some background in philosophy, folks who had some background perhaps in Hegel, this is going to sound really familiar because if you ever the logic, the progression of the logic in Hegel, Hegel actually commends Kabbalah as prefiguring his logic. Now, I'm not sure if that's an indictment of Kabbalah or not, depending on what you think of Hegel, but Hegel's system of the unfolding of reality is deeply influenced by the Lurianic sort of folding out structure of reality. Now, as God's light begins to travel through the void, what ends up happening is that the very structures that emerge to hold God's light, the very moments of the divine, as the light gets further and further and further into the void, the very structures that are meant to hold the divine light can't. They're just too far away. It's just like, I don't know, it's a moment where you feel yourself, you're holding on to something right and you feel yourself just slipping off. There's a moment where you just let go. And that let go moment, the moment where the spheres, the actual vessels that hold God's light, because they've gotten so far away from the original source, they don't have enough energy, they don't have enough dynamism, they don't have enough of tesuk, they don't have enough strength to hold God's light, and they shatter. And that shattering, the shira, the shattering of the vessels, is as it pulls in, they overpower the vessels, right, and they shatter. It's like putting, folks ever seen this where you take a really cold glass vessel and pour really hot water into it, right? Or, I'm sure you've seen folks, right, throw hot water on a cold windshield. Gets people to know it better. But imagine, right, hot water being poured into an ice cold vessel. The ice cold vessel is the vacuum, the void, the singstone. And when you pour the lightning hot rays of God into it, the vessels just shatter. And that shattering forms what are called shards. And these shards of these vessels, these shards are characterized by disharmony and disunity, broken aspects of the divine. They're aspects of the divine that are localized, just like you can imagine taking a part of your own personality and breaking it off of it. So just imagine your curiosity, right? Just pure curiosity, which is a pretty good trait, and broke it off and made it its own thing. Pure curiosity is a disaster. Because anything that's purely curious is going to get something killed, it's going to hurt people, it's not going to have any ethics, it'll just experiment on people. And even love, right? Pure love, if you take it away and put it with no checks at all, it's too much. Any aspect of the divine broken away from the divine and then given its own reality will always be too much. No matter what it is, whether it's God's wrath or God's goodness, whether it's God's curiosity or whatever, none of these things can exist on their own. And the shards of these vessels Vessels, according to Luria, become evil. Now, they're not inherently evil, but because they're localized, intense versions of the divine, they shouldn't be allowed to exist on their own, and because they shouldn't be allowed to exist on their own, they go haywire. And these become evil in the Lurianic system. This is the origin of evil. The demons of the world are the Klipot, the shards of the vessels that once held God's life. Because they're just out of control. They're completely disunited, completely unharmonized. And so they're sort of like extreme versions of God. And so these demonic aspects of the demonic aspects of the Lurian system are these Klipot, and they are the object of a process called tikkun, that you're already beginning to hear, right, where we're going to get to next, right, the idea of tikkun olam. Well, we are right at the very end of that system. The entire giant system of God, Simsum, and God poured God's light in, and the entire process of the shattering of the vessel, we're at the very limit of that system. And so it's a very limit of that system, right? It's like a rubber band, right? If you stretch a rubber band out, let it go, it flies all the way this way, flies back. We are at the very end, the receiving end of all of the divine systems. We are at the very bottom of the system, and we are the part of the system that begins to move back upward. Right? We are the system, we are the part that moves things back up. And what happens is that we recognize, Lurianic Kabbalists recognize, that the shards of the divine, the Klipot, can be rectified by engaging in the magic of the Torah. Again, Yitzhak Luria is not sort of a hippy-dippy mystic. He says, no, you repair the world, you metaphysically repair the world by engaging in the metaphysical act of engaging in following God's law. Because the divine law, the Torah is the system, it's like the source code of all reality. And if you follow it, if you do it correctly, it fixes reality. Reality is broken somehow. And so the fix is, according to Yitzhak Luria, the very strict following of the Jewish law, of the Halakha, and of the Torah. So by following the Torah, you repair reality. And this is where the phrase tikkun olam comes from. You are repairing the world. Now, I know that most folks hear the word tikkun olam and we think something like people who are charity or something like that. But for Yitzhak Luria, it's not just a fixing the world in terms of the social ills we're doing, social justice stuff. That's of course part of it too. But by having the right kavanah, by having the right concentration, by having the right intention, by doing the Jewish law with absolute intention, purity of heart, by performing things like Shabbat, by putting tefillin on, by observing the fast of Yom Kippur or whatever, all of these things help to repair reality. They fix reality at the metaphysical level. They give reality a tikkun. And further, you begin to build the world of Messiah. Because for the Illuminating system, the act of reparation, the act of repairing the world, begins to sort of build the world in which the Messiah can emerge. And at some level, you can imagine that Messiah is kind of the keystone of the entire process. The Messiah is the person who will turn the key. We will build the world worthy of Messiah, and Messiah will come and turn the key, and they will unfurl the final redemption. And so it's by repairing the world that we prepare the world for the possibility of Messiah. And this idea is going to have enormous impact in the history of Judaism. If you ever hung out with folks in the Chabad Lubavitch movement, I don't know if folks have ever been around Chabad people who can light candles, felon. You can be walking around New York and I'll have a Chabad guy like on the street like, hey, you put the tefillin on today? And I'm like, no. He's like, you put the tefillin on now. Why would they bother you on the street and put the tefillin on? It's not because they're trying to do you a favor. They're trying to engage in tikkun olam. They think that every Jew, whatever that means to them, who can engage in the process of tikkun olam and who can put the tefillin on was usher in the days of the Messiah. That was what. And so they're trying at some level to accelerate, right? One good thing about Kabbalistic ideas are learning at Kabbalah, the kind of Jewish accelerationism. The world is broken, and they're trying to accelerate the process by which it's repaired. And you accelerate that process by engaging in spiritual warfare against the Klipot and by binding and then repairing the Klipot in a way that allows you to basically accelerate the process by which the Messiah comes. And if you read Chaim Vital, he really does think that he definitely thinks he's the Messiah. He just thinks that he has to be a little bit more righteous. If he could just be a little more, if he just didn't think about that woman when he was praying, he just didn't think that dirty thought. If he just memorized a little bit more Mishnah, then he would have been revealed as the Messiah. He would have emerged as the Messiah. This is an idea you see constantly. He's Chaim Vital simultaneously manages to be both incredibly self-deprecating and also incredibly arrogant. I guess that tends to go hand in hand. But sometimes he's I'm unworthy of anything. The lowest of the low. He's like, yeah, if I've just done this, I'd be the Messiah. So the idea is that the Messiah is right around the corner. It's the result of this process of change. Now, of course, that idea has gotten retrofitted in sort of liberal Jewish circles for social justice, but in classical Kabbalistic world, it has everything to do with strict obedience to Torah. Another key innovation in the Lurianic system is that Luria is really obsessed with some of the more bizarre sections of the Zohar. There are three sections of the Zohar that are notoriously difficult to understand. Two of them are the Hidrot, the assemblies, and the final is a section called Sifra Ditzniuta. And Sifra Ditzniuta is a relatively brief section of the Zohar that contains a long description of God's beard. And then there's another section that also contains descriptions of God's beard, but also God's face in general. And no one's really sure what in the world's going on in those sections. They're really, really weird. Weird even compared to the other sections of Zohar. Zohar is weird enough, but it's like weird on weird. And it's like Luria develops a systematization of this idea of the movements within the divine face. That the divine face is actually reflective of metaphysical changes in reality, and that the divine face are the countenances, the Partsufim, that these Partsufim are arrangements of the Sfirot, and those arrangements of the Sfirot are indicators of certain kinds of changes and developments within the divine. I will go ahead and say this, the Partsufim is without a doubt the most complicated part of the entire structure of Lurianic Kabbalah, because it's analyzing the Sfirot in terms of how they're arranged and how the various system relates to itself internally. And it is just completely difficult to understand. I still struggle trying to figure out, I know what the various configurations are, I know what the Ima and the compiling or whatever, I know what the structures look like, but when you begin to analyze how they move and change in relation to other mystical stuff going on in the Arizal system, it just becomes a maze. It just becomes a maze. So I have a real difficult time keeping track of what's going on in this inner development of the Godhead. But what's important to note is that for Luria, God is not a thing. God is a process. And God is changing all the time. And so when God tells to Moshe Rabbeinu, right, I'll be what I'll be, Luria takes that really seriously. Yeah, God is changing. God is a process. God is not a thing. God is a process. And that process is reality. And we are a part of that process. And just like you get angry, so does God. And just like you get, compassionate, so does God. And that the change of God from angry to compassion, or the change from a normal state of affairs to being angry, that change in your emotions can be mapped. And so ditto God, a change in God's emotional life can be mapped. And those mappings of God's emotional psychology or intellectual psychology are the parts of it. It's very complicated. It's part of the inner psychology, inner divine psychology. It's really complicated. Also, famously, it's like Luria is going to reintroduce the concept of reincarnation into Judaism. Reincarnation is an idea that never really took hold in most of the Abrahamic faiths, although there are tiny groups of people who have believed in it at some point, but most of the larger Abrahamic faiths have rejected reincarnation for various kinds of reasons. However, in Lurianic Kabbalah, reincarnation is completely acceptable. In fact, it's part of the system. In fact, sort of a general idea, this is Chaim Vital's major work. It's Chaim. This is the most systematic account of Isaac Luria's philosophy. This is the major work of Isaac Luria's philosophy as articulated by Chaim Vital, and this is the standard now 2-volume text on reincarnation by Chaim Vital, the teaching of the Zakluria on reincarnation. It's the Shari of the Belief, of reincarnation. So, reincarnation is an idea that is reintroduced into Judaism. It may have existed earlier in some ways, but certainly Vital really introduces it via the Zakluria. The idea is that every single person has what they call a soul root. And the soul root is a kind of aspect of your soul. There are 5 different layers of your soul according to the Lurianic system. And some of those parts of your soul go all the way back to the beginning of all creation. And various people have had that soul. You are, like, again, a root. You are a root, and there are things growing off the root. You're one of the things growing off the root. And there have been many, many, many people prior to you that have had the same soul as you. Now, the bad thing about that is they commit all kinds of sins that you're now responsible for fixing. Because again, remember, the Luria system is dynamic. Just because you engage in tikkun once doesn't mean that you did bad stuff before. If you did bad stuff, well, if you break the Jewish law, that further damages reality. And so there have been people in the past that have really damaged reality. Maybe in your past life you were someone really bad. Chaim Vital, by the way, his soul root was Cain, the first murderer. And so as you can imagine, Chaim Vital, soul root was Cain, had a lot to fix because he was the literal origin of murder in the world. And so he had to navigate all kinds of what are called tikkunim, these reparations, and these reparations include everything from ascetic practices to certain parts of the Bible to mystical practices. And so the idea is that not only are you responsible for you being good you have to make up for all the things that have happened prior to you. And so every person that's had your soul prior to you are now responsible for figuring out how to fix all the bad things they did. Because all the bad things are still there. You're most apt to fix them. Now, how do you figure that out? You go to a mystic, a Kabbalist, and the Kabbalist will tell you who your soul root is, and they will tell you all the bad things that you've done, and they will give you tikkunim and how to fix them. Tikkunim can be anything from extra prayers to amulets to fasting, all kinds of tikkunim. If you ever go to Safed, if you ever go to Safed to this day, you can go to Kabbalists. I've seen signs in Safed where they will go and they will figure out what your soul root is. And they're alleged experts who know how to do this. I don't know they know how to do this, but I'll give it to them. That's fine. And they can figure out who your soul root is, and they will tell you that your soul root was Lamech, and you have to, they can descend, and you are inherited descent, and these are the kind of tikkunim that you need to do, reparation you need to do to fix the sins of your past lives. Reincarnation has entered into Judaism completely intact, and it is a completely viable way to go after afterlife. It's not heterodox at all. It's very normative at this point. And so, reincarnation, with the rise of Luria and Kabbalah, is now basically normalized. In a way that I don't think it is in Christianity and Islam. I think in Christianity and Islam, if you want to believe in reincarnation, you don't want to make a big deal of it. I think if you make a big deal of it, if you're Catholic, whatever, you get in trouble. Whereas in Judaism, reincarnation is completely normalized. Now I say it's normalized, but it's only normalized within the system of Luria and Kabbalah, where you would, if you want to find out who your reincarnation is of, you need to do the work of fixing all the sins that you shop to learn all the bad things you did in your past life. Now you do also learn the merit of your past life, but you also learn the past things too. This idea that the soul can survive death, that can be reborn, also means that various other regions of the soul, again, you have 5 regions of your soul. Some other regions of your soul can actually survive death and become detached from the other regions. And those detached parts of your soul, if you committed a lot of sins in your life, they become addicted to those sins. And those that aspect of your soul that becomes addicted to those sins actually can roam around and want to continue doing sins in the next life. This is especially true of sexual sin. Also gluttony and drunkenness and stuff. And so if you are a lecherous, drunken, bad person, then if you become addicted to those things, when you die, your soul will become so polluted that it will become detached from your other souls, and it will roam around. And what does it want to do? It wants to continue doing what it did, getting drunk and having sex or whatever. And so what it will do is it will try to attach itself to other people, because you can't really get drunk and have sex if you lose the soul, so you got to get attached to someone else. And so when your soul attaches, your evil soul attaches itself to people, the word for to attach in Hebrew is daba, right? Like the modern Hebrew word for glue comes from the same root word. Your soul daba, it clings to other people, and that soul that clings to other people possesses them. This is the origin of the Dybbuk. The Dybbuk is an evil version of your soul, it's an evil aspect of your soul that roams around and tries to attach itself to the people. And the very earliest exorcism stories that we have in Judaism are actually from Satan. In fact, we taught a whole class on spirit possession in Judaism, and if you want to learn more about this, I have some episodes on my YouTube channel as well. But what you have here is demonic possession. Demonic possession is not the right word. It's not a demon. It's actually an evil, dead person doing possessing. And so Dybbuk becomes a big deal in the Kabbalistic world as well. But the opposite's true too. The soul of very righteous people hangs around near their grave, and if you need to get some spiritual chizuk, some righteousness, let's say that you're traveling somewhere and you know that your old paramour is going to be there, and you don't want to hook up with them. This is a real example, by the way. You want to hook up with them, be married, whatever. It's adultery. That's bad. So what do? You go into the graveyard of a righteous person, and you lay on the grave of the righteous person, and you meditate on their soul, and you invite their soul into your soul, and they will impregnate you. This is called a war, and the soul of the righteous dead person will impregnate your soul with a little bit of their righteousness, and it will give you enough of righteousness that when you go to face the spiritual challenge of committing adultery, you won't do it, because it's like a shot in the arm, a shot in the soul from the righteous person to the righteous person, give you the spiritual power to overcome your failure, your sin, and then they will come back to their grave and they'll help us. For folks who know a little about Buddhism, right, this sounds a bit like bodhisattvas, right? The idea that there are people who are enlightened in the Buddhist tradition, they become so enlightened, they don't become completely enlightened, so they can stick around here to help the rest of us shrunks. Right? These are bodhisattvas. They don't leave, they don't go to nirvana, they stay here to help the rest of us get a little bit more enlightened. And so these tzaddakim, these righteous people, you can go lay on their graves, and you can get a little bit of spiritual power from their soul, and will go into your soul and help you. People do this to this day. It's a problem, actually, that people get caught sneaking into graveyards and lying on graves to get soul power. Soul power is a cool setting. So at any rate, so this idea of war becomes a big idea as well. So Dybbuk, right, is evil souls become attached to your body. They can also get animals, by the way. They don't like to be animals. Apparently it's not good in there, but they want to get the people. And Chaim Vital, by the way, also became one of the earliest exorcists of this whole tradition. By the way, he failed. He also did the Dybbuk to leave, and then as soon as the Dybbuk left, it will come back and repossess the person and kill them. And so there's all kinds of great Dybbuk stories. If you've never seen the movie The Dybbuk, it's one of the great classics of Yiddish film. It was filmed in the 30s. In fact, many people that worked on the film died in the Holocaust. And so it's really, I think they remastered it, they redone the Yiddish subtitles, and if you ever seen The Dybbuk, it's a great film from the 30s. It's a classic example of Yiddish theater and especially Yiddish filmmaking. So probably the crowning achievement before it all went to hell with Hollywood. But The Dybbuk is a classic movie. We're getting close to Halloween time. If you want some Jewish Halloween movie watching The Dybbuk. So the Dybbuk is an idea that emerges also from Lurianic Kabbalah, but also as I said a minute ago, Lurianic Kabbalah becomes just Kabbalah. If you've ever studied Kabbalah, you've heard this term, right? You've heard of the world of Absolute, the world of Asiya. You know that the soul has, there's a Yechida, Neshama, Ruach, and various parts of the soul. Lurianic Kabbalah just became Kabbalah. It absorbed all other previous forms of Kabbalah, whether it's Abraham Avinavi's Kabbalah, whether it's Pharaoh's Kabbalah, whether it's other forms of Kabbalah. It absorbed them all. In some ways, transcended them all. It abolished them all, and it ascended above them all. And by both eliminating all of them and then conglomerating all of them into one thing, it became a new thing. And that new thing basically has become Jewish theology. If you've ever read books of Jewish theology, a lot of books of Jewish theology, they're almost always derivative of Encyclopedias. And that's true of Hasidic people. That's true of Messianic people, the opponents of the Hasidic people. That's true of hardcore Jewish rationalists, people like the Vilna Gaon, right? The hardcore rational guys. Also hardcore Kabbalists. Kabbalah, Lurian Kabbalah, is at some level just Jewish theology. Now, what's ironic about that, we'll talk about this more as we wrap the class up in a few weeks, why aren't these texts available then? If at some level, Tikkun Olam and all these ideas are just basically now part of our theological landscape in Judaism, why isn't it that you just can't go buy a copy of Eitz's Chaim in English? Why is it you can't just go buy a copy of Cordovero's Artist Room in English? Why is it that the entire 15-volume Kitvei Ha'ari, collected works of the Ari, are not translated? There's a reason for that. And we'll get to that in a few weeks. There is a really important reason for why that is. It has everything to do with liberal Judaism. How liberal Judaism decanonized Kabbalah. It rejected Kabbalah. And that's part of what made liberal modern Judaism is the amputation of Kabbalah from Judaism. Now that's changing, but it's not changing in the right way. Because the way it's changing is not just changing in the sense that Kabbalah's idea is being imported. They're being imported haphazardly. And the original texts are not being consulted, and they're not being really translated. And so modern Jews who are interested in Kabbalah don't have access to the original texts. And that's a disaster. It's a real disaster. I mean, imagine if, if the works of Thomas Aquinas just weren't translated in English. You had to rely on old Latin musicians and stuff like that. That would be a mess. Well, that's what basically we have. It's as if Thomas Aquinas had the influence he did in the Catholic world, but no Catholics have access to his actual works in a reliable. It's a mess. It's a real mess. So, and again, this is a standard volume of Eitz's Chaim in Hebrew. There's no English translation. There's no translation. We'll talk about why in a few weeks, but there's just not one. It's a mess. It's a bad situation. So, at the end of the day, Yitzhak Luria's version of Kabbalah wins. It wins. Now, I'm not saying it's completely systematic, and I'm not saying it's completely all worked out. There's still a bunch of kinks in the system. But at the end of the day, 15-volume collected works of the Arizal, really the works of Chaim Vital, is systematizing the works at some level of Arizal. That becomes Jewish theology. Now, on one hand, it's really cool because Kabbalah won. On the other hand, it's a disaster because most Jews who are interested in Kabbalah, at least in the non-Orthodox world, have no access to it. It's a mess. This is a real problem. I don't know how it's going to get solved, but it's just now in the past 10 years that the entire Zohar has been translated reliably. So this is a big problem. We'll talk about this problem. We'll talk about why we're in this boat and how we're going to get out of it in a few weeks. But it may just, in our lifetime, we may be getting out of that problem. It may take our entire lifetime to get out of this problem. We'll talk about where it came from, why it is that, and how it got there. I think it's 6 years after Chaim Vital died, the greatest articulator of the Lurianic system of Kabbalah, 6 years after he dies, a guy is born in Asia Minor, in what is now Turkey, Izmir. He's born on Tisha B'Av. He's born on Tisha B'Av, which happens to fall on Shabbat that year. And there's a long-standing idea in Jewish lore that the Messiah will be born on the saddest day of the year. That the day of the year that we were born, every bad thing that's ever happened to us. The great hope is that on that day, the Messiah will be born. That in the future, Tisha B'Av will no longer be a sad day. It will be a glorious day because that'll be the birthday of the Messiah. On Saturday of Tisha B'Av, 6 years after the death of Chaim Vital, Shabbatai Tzvi is born. And Shabbatai Tzvi is going to transform Kabbalah because he's going to become the Messiah. And not just become the Messiah. When I say that, I mean the majority of the world's Jews were convinced he was the Messiah. He convinced the world's Jews that he was the Messiah via his publicist in Gaza using Kabbalah. And he will become a known Messiah. In fact, in many ways, if we think about Judaism as a religion, in some ways, as before Shabbatai Tzvi, after. And And Shabbatai Tzvi is going to transform Judaism. He's going to transform so much of what's going to happen to Judaism. And so what we're going to do is he's going to basically shake Judaism to his core. Because as you probably know, he will declare himself the Messiah. The vast majority of Jews will believe that he's the Messiah. Many of them literally have their bags packed on the docks in Amsterdam, ready to go back home to Israel to live in the Messianic age in 1666, he converts to Islam. And it was a titanic disaster. Prior to the Holocaust, there's been no greater disaster than Shabbatai Tzvi episode. No greater disaster. And from a theological point of view, it's a disaster. So in many ways, right, you can think about Shabbatai Tzvi is the full promise. And I imagine most folks here have heard the idea that you can't study Kabbalah until you're 40. I'm sure folks have heard that idea. Well, notice that Yitzhak Luria died before he was 40. Clearly, he was studying Kabbalah before he was 40. Where do ideas like that come from? They come in the afterlife of Shabbatai Tzvi. Because the idea that Kabbalah is so dangerous that it can lead the entire Jewish world to a disaster. And that disaster, Kabbalistic disaster, will be heralded by Shabbatai Tzvi, false Messiah. We will turn to him and his arguments for his Messiahhood next time. So Shabbatai Tzvi, and also Frankism. Frankism is a derivative of Shabbatai Tzvi. So we'll turn our attention to Shabbatai Tzvi to its mystical heresy. His Kabbalah got off the rails, totally off the rails. So we will deal with Shabbatai Tzvi and his so-called messianism. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me as I explore the garden that is Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. Again, if you'd like to support my work of providing accessible, free, and scholarly content on topics like Kabbalah, alchemy, and the occult, magic, and philosophy, consider supporting my work on Patreon or perhaps with a one-time donation. You can find those links below. Until next time, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and thank you for watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.
Saying, oh, I want to bring something else that is really most of the economies were actually